All right, everyone, get ready because today we're going deep, really deep into the chemistry of life.
Yeah, we're talking about the actual building blocks of, well, everything.
We're diving into building blocks of life and this other awesome source, Introduction to Chemical Reactions, to uncover the secrets behind those tiny molecules that make life possible, from the smallest atom to those big, essential macromolecules.
And trust me, understanding these building blocks is super important because they're found in every single living thing.
Okay, so let's start with those macromolecules. They sound kind of important. What exactly are they?
So imagine a single Lego brick versus like a massive Lego castle, right? Macromolecules are like those castles, but for our cells. Super complex, totally essential, and full of these intricate little details.
Gotcha. So they're like the heavy hitters of the molecule world. And just like you need different types of Lego bricks, we have different classes of macromolecules, right?
Exactly. Four main ones, actually. We've got carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And get this, they're all assembled from even smaller molecules called monomers.
So it's like building blocks for the building blocks? That's wild.
Totally. It's like using the same set of Legos to build absolutely anything you can imagine.
That's a great analogy. Okay, first up, let's talk carbs. I think we all know a bit about carbohydrates, sugars, starches. They're what give us energy, right?
Exactly. Think of carbohydrates like the fuel that keeps our cells running.
Mm.
They're mainly made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And their monomer, the basic building block, is a monosaccharide.
A monosaccharide. That's a fancy word for a simple sugar, right?
You got it.
So when we eat carbs, our bodies break them down into those simple sugars to use as energy.
Exactly. Just like burning wood releases energy stored in those chemical bonds, our bodies do the same thing with carbs. It's like our bodies are burning firewood, and glucose, a simple sugar, is like the kindling. It's the quick energy our cells need to function.
That makes sense. Okay, moving on to proteins. I always hear about how important protein is. What makes them so special?
Proteins are like the ultimate multitaskers of our cells. They do it all. And they're incredibly diverse, made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. They're in everything from your hair and muscles to those enzymes that help you digest food.
Wow, so they're like the builders, the movers, the shakers of the cell. What are they made of?
Their building blocks are amino acids. There are 20 different ones, each with a unique shape. Imagine them like puzzle pieces.
Okay, so our bodies are constantly putting these amino acid puzzle pieces together in different combinations.
Exactly. And when those amino acids link up, they form something called peptide bonds. Those bonds create long chains, and those chains are basically what proteins are. We also call those polypeptides.
Man, it's crazy how much complexity is packed into these tiny things.
Yeah.
All right, let's switch gears to lipids. I know they sometimes get a bad rap, but they're important too, right?
For sure. Lipids, or fats, are absolutely essential. They're crucial for energy storage, keeping us insulated, even forming the structure of our cells. Think of them like the body's long-term energy savings account.
So like when we eat more calories than we burn, our bodies are like, okay, time to store some of that as lipids for later.
Exactly. They're way more efficient for storing energy than carbohydrates. And just like carbs, they're mostly made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But their structure is different. Their building blocks are fatty acids and glycerol.
And I know there are different kinds of fats, right? Like saturated and unsaturated, what makes them different?
It all comes down to those chemical bonds again. Saturated fats, like the ones in butter, are solid at room temperature because the fatty acid chains are straight. They can pack together really tightly. Unsaturated fats, on the other hand, like olive oil, have kinks in their fatty acid chains because of those double bonds. That's why they're liquid at room temperature.
Gotcha. It's all about how those molecules fit together. So generally, the unsaturated fats are the ones we want to focus on for our health.
Generally, yes, although both types of fat are important for different reasons in the body. Unsaturated fats are often called the healthy fats because they can help lower cholesterol and reduce the risk of heart disease.
Good to know. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about nucleic acids. They're the ones that hold our genetic information, which is mind-blowing in itself. But how does that actually work?
Nucleic acids are like the blueprints for life, right? They carry all the instructions for building and maintaining an organism. And get this, they get passed down from generation to generation.
Whoa, it's like they hold the instructions for life itself. And there are two main types, DNA and RNA, is that right?
You got it. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is like the master blueprint. It's stored in the nucleus of every cell, holding all those essential instructions. RNA, or ribonucleic acid, is more like a messenger. It takes copies of those instructions to different parts of the cell, telling them what proteins to build.
Okay, so DNA has the original blueprints, and RNA carries copies to where they're needed.
Exactly. And both DNA and RNA are built from these things called nucleotides. Picture a nucleotide like a puzzle piece with three parts. You've got a sugar molecule, a phosphate group, and a nitrogenous base.
Okay, so what makes those bases so special? How do they actually create those building instructions?
It's like a language, actually. The order of these bases, there are four main ones in DNA. Adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine determines the genetic code. RNA uses uracil instead of thymine, but it's the same idea. It's like a code written with those four letters that spells out the directions for building proteins. And those proteins, they carry out all the amazing functions of life.
Wow, it's like a secret code embedded within us. So that's carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, the four major classes of macromolecules. They all sound incredibly important, but how do they actually work together? How do they function within our bodies?
That's where chemical reactions come in.
Well, let's dive into that in the next part of our deep dive. All right, so we've covered the amazing world of macromolecules, those big players in our cells. But they don't just sit there, right? Chemical reactions are where the real action happens.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Macromolecules are like the ingredients, and chemical reactions are the recipes that make those ingredients come to life.
So chemical reactions are like the chefs of our cells, transforming all those ingredients into, well, us.
Exactly. A chemical reaction is basically a process where atoms, those tiny building blocks, rearrange themselves. They break bonds and form new ones to create brand new molecules. And it's happening everywhere, not just inside us. Every time you bake a cake, strike a match, you're seeing chemical reactions in action.
That's pretty mind-blowing. It's amazing how these tiny rearrangements are going on, constantly powering, well, life. But speaking of rearrangements, how do atoms actually stick together in the first place? We talked about different types of bonds. Could you refresh our memory?
Right. Think of those chemical bonds like different ways of holding hands. Covalent bonds, they're like a super strong grip, where atoms share electrons to create a stable molecule.
Like a really solid friendship built on sharing.
Exactly. And then you have those ionic bonds. That's where one atom's feeling generous and decides to donate an electron to another. This creates ions, which are just atoms with either a positive or a negative charge. And you know what they say? Opposites attract. Those opposite charges attract each other, and bam, you've got your ionic bond.
Aha. So it's like one friend giving a gift to another to solidify their bond. I like it. What about metallic bonds? They seem a little different.
Metallic bonds are like a big group hug. You've got a bunch of metal atoms all huddled up, sharing their outer electrons in this sea of electrons. Ah, I get it. And that's what gives metals their unique properties, right? Like how you can bend them and shape them, or how well they conduct electricity.
You got it. That sea of electrons allows them to move easily and makes them superconductive.
Yeah.
Okay, but back to the reactions themselves. You often hear about reactants and products, kind of like the ingredients and then the final dish, right?
Right. You start with your reactants like flour, sugar, eggs, your basic ingredients, and then through a chemical reaction, poof, you end up with a cake.
Exactly. The reactants are what you have before the reaction happens, and the products are the new stuff that gets made after. And just like with a recipe, sometimes you might run out of a certain ingredient, and that limits how much of the final product you can make.
Yes, the limiting reactant. Always a bummer when you realize you're out of something crucial. It happens. That's the reactant that gets completely used up first, which unfortunately stops the whole reaction from going any further. But sometimes, even when you have all the ingredients, those reactions need a little encouragement to get going.
Like a good chef needs the right tools and techniques.
Exactly. That's where enzymes step in.
Enzymes, those are proteins, right? The ones that speed up reactions.
You got it. They're like the kitchen appliances of our cells. They make those reactions happen way faster so life can keep up.
So they're like our blenders and food processors, making everything super efficient. I like that. How do they actually work?
They lower the activation energy?
Activation energy. Is that like the amount of effort it takes to get the reaction going?
You got it. Every reaction needs a little push to get started. It's like needing to mix the ingredients before you can bake that cake. Enzymes, they lower that initial hurdle, making it way easier for the reaction to happen. They have this special place called the active site, perfectly shaped to bind to specific reactant molecules, which are called substrates.
So it's like the enzyme has a special docking station just for the molecules it works with.
Precisely. This binding, it lowers the activation energy. Think about it like having a fancy stand mixer that perfectly holds your bowl and whisk it, makes the whole mixing process a breeze. And speaking of energy, chemical reactions involve energy changes too. Some reactions, they release energy, while others actually need energy to happen.
Right, like those exothermic and endothermic reactions. I always mix those up.
Okay, well, picture this. Exothermic reactions, they release energy. Think of a roaring fire giving off heat. That's exothermic. Endothermic reactions, they're the opposite. They absorb energy. Like when an ice cube melts in your drink, making it cold, that's endothermic.
So exothermic is like releasing heat, and endothermic is absorbing it. Got
Yeah.
it. So burning wood is exothermic. It gives off heat and light, and photosynthesis in plants, that's endothermic because it needs sunlight to work.
You got it. You're a natural.
This is fascinating. We've covered so much in this deep dive, from those tiny atoms to complex macromolecules, and now the incredible chemical reactions that make them all work. But you know what's really hitting me? A lot of this depends on one super important molecule, water.
You're absolutely right. Water is essential for life as we know it, and it's all thanks to its unique structure and the way those water molecules interact.
Okay, let's dive into that next, because I'm ready to be amazed by H2O. Okay, water. It's everywhere. We drink it, we swim in it, our bodies are mostly made of it. But what makes this H2O so incredibly special?
Water, it's like the ultimate multitasker.
Yeah.
Seriously. And it's all thanks to its unique structure and these things called, get this, intermolecular forces.
Intermolecular forces. Okay, that sounds kind of intense.
They're like the social butterflies of the molecule world. They influence how molecules get along with each other, how they interact. And in water, one of the most important ones is the hydrogen bond.
Right, hydrogen bonds. Okay, remind me how those work again?
So imagine a water molecule, like a teeny tiny magnet, okay? With a slightly positive end and a slightly negative end. The positive end, that's where the hydrogen atoms hang out, is attracted to the negative end of other water molecules, which is where the oxygen is.
Yeah.
That attraction, that's your hydrogen bond.
So it's like they're holding hands, the molecules, I mean.
Exactly. And it's not as strong as the bonds holding the water molecule itself together, but it's still super important. It's what gives water its amazing properties. Like, ever wonder how insects can just walk on water?
Yeah, it's like they have tiny little water shoes. It's amazing.
It's those hydrogen bonds. They create this sort of film on the water's surface that's actually strong enough to support their weight.
Wow. That's incredible.
And that same force is what helps water climb up plants, defying gravity to deliver nutrients from the roots all the way to the leaves.
Hydrogen bonds. They're like the unsung heroes of the natural world. Our source material also mentioned something called van der Waals forces. How do those fit into all of this?
Ah, yes. Van der Waals forces, those are like the quiet whispers of attraction between molecules. Definitely weaker than hydrogen bonds, but they still play a role, especially in biological systems.
So they're like those background interactions that you might not notice at first, but they're still kind of important.
Exactly. Subtle, but important. Especially when you think about how many molecules are interacting in, say, a single cell. It all adds up.
It's amazing how these tiny forces we can't even see end up shaping the entire world around us. We've covered so much in this deep dive: atoms, those essential macromolecules, chemical reactions, all the different ways those molecules bond, even the fascinating world of water.
It really makes you appreciate the elegance of chemistry. These fundamental principles are at work every second of every day, driving life from the simplest single-celled organism to the most complex ecosystems. Pretty mind-blowing.
It really is. And it all comes back to those tiny, tiny building blocks, those atoms, constantly rearranging, bonding, reacting to create the incredible diversity of life we see all around us. So next time you take a sip of water, just remember, you're not just quenching your thirst, you're experiencing the power of chemistry in action. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. Until next time.